3 elk that had been grazing 200 yards from camp disappeared into the woods as the rifle blasted over the valley. Prior to the echo diminishing, John Hatcher turned to the young after observing the final flick of the brown tail fade. Trapper next to him with a nonverbal expression. The Little Snake River Valley was in the winter of 1828. Northern Colorado, and each shot meant a delay in survival. The Arapjo. After hearing that report, hunting groups that claimed this area would know just where to look for unwanted guests. Come spring, the sound would be remembered by the grizzlies hibernating in neighboring caverns. Furthermore, the game that hadn't for the next month scattered would learn to stay away from this drainage. However, John Hatcher was going to impart it. For the next 20 years, a newcomer called Seth Williams would alter the way mountain men hunted throughout the Rockies. Neither Eastern inventors nor St. Louis gunsmiths would have invented it. It would arise out of need, observation, and one man's denial that hunting was possible only in the way the others hunted. In the 1820s, mountain men's issue wasn't merely about taking care of themselves. It dealt with being invisible in a setting where miles may carry sound, and to be found meant to be dead. Each mountain, the harsh math of the woods, was known to man. You could eat for 3 days with just one rifle shot. The identical shot by dusk, it can also bring a Blackfoot war party down on your camp. The Rockies were where John Hatcher had arrived in 1824, following William Henry. As part of the influx of trappers to the west, Ashley advertised adventure and money in the newspapers. He had acquired his skills by trial and error, making every error a greenhorn might make and managing to survive each one. By 1828, he gained a reputation as a man who could vanish into the countryside where others left traces, according to other trappers, like a herd of buffalo. In November, Seth Williams discovered Hatcher's cottage. Half his partner was slain by a bear near the North Platte, leaving him freezing and desperate. Hatcher adopted him, as mountain men frequently helped one another, and over the winter they started teaching Williams survival skills. Isolated in the woods, Hatcher took Williams 3 miles up a side canyon the morning after he startled the elk. A clearing with natural shooting lanes formed by fallen timber. The bulky .53 caliber Plains rifle he was carrying was his Hawan gun, rifle that was now considered essential gear for serious trappers. However, he was also carrying a small bow that was fashioned from orange wood that was shaped differently than Williams had ever seen, wrapped in sinew observed. Hatcher put the bow down and started outlining the requirements Williams must meet in order for the weapon to make sense. The class began by discussing distance and sound and how they relate to each other in mountainous region. The sound doesn't just travel in a mountain valley when you fire a rifle, Hatcher clarified. Straight line. It swirls through gorges, bounces off granite sides, and can, under ideal circumstances, it can be heard for 5 miles in all directions. A war party encamped 3 ridges away will be able to hear it. It will be registered by a bear den 4 miles upstream. And all the bighorn sheep, deer, and elk within 2 miles will recall that place as hazardous. But there were other issues besides sound. Smoke from black powder hovered in the cold. Like a signal fire, mountain air. Any person with good vision might see the white cloud from across a valley. And your position was marked as clearly as a wildfire by the acrid chemical odor that persisted for hours. Additionally, there was the reload time issue. Under ideal circumstances, a skilled rifleman could reload a Hawan in roughly 45 seconds. It took longer because of the cold and numb fingertips. If your initial attempt to shoot an elk was unsuccessful, or if you injured it without dropping, as you struggled with the powder horn, one animal managed to escape, warning everyone else nearby. Ramrod. 3 years of experimentation were symbolized by the bow hatcher that was hauled up. With an issue that the majority of mountain men had just come to terms with as being intractable, the hunting remained the standard method for silent hunting. The age-old method of tracking prey so closely that you might use a knife or a tomahawk to kill. However, hunting still needed the ideal wind, the ideal terrain, as well as good fortune. An incorrect move, a changed breeze, and hours of work vanished. During his 4th winter in the highlands, Hatcher had come to a realization. That wasn't the issue. Bows didn't work. Tribes from the plains hunted buffalo with terrible success using them. The issue was because the majority of white trappers were not proficient bow shooters, and the bows they occasionally attempted to construct were shoddy replicas of what they had observed from afar. Hatcher's bow was not a replica. It was a combination of 3 distinct designs that he had seen and tried. The timber arrived, from an Osage orange tree that thrived in Missouri's riverbeds. The stave had been taken west by Hatcher during his final supply journey to the communities. understanding that there were attributes in this thick, pliable wood that no mountain timber might be comparable. Elk backstrap was used to make the sinew wrapping, which was meticulously prepared and placed in layers that strengthened the back of the bow without increasing weight. This method he had exchanged with a Ute hunter 2 winters prior. Sinew did not allow the prevented fissures in the wood and made it possible for the bow to bend more than an unwrapped stave could. However, the recurved form of the tips was an inventive feature that set Hatcher's design apart. The majority of trappers' bows were basic curved sticks. Hatcher had observed that bows were utilized by some of the Crow and Shoshone's top hunters, where, when the string was released, the tips snapped back after bending away from the archer. This recurved design produced arrow speeds that were comparable to what a much longer bow could achieve by storing more energy in a shorter bow length. Accomplish. The end product was a 48-inch weapon with a 26-inch arrow, 40 yards via the chest cavity of an elk. Furthermore, it did so in total quiet, save for the murmur of feathers in the air and the gentle twang of the bowring. Williams looked at the bow doubtfully. As a child, he had attempted shooting a bow a few times in the East, and keep in mind that you did it for fun rather than for survival. The notion of purposefully selecting a bow rather than a gun capable of dropping an elk at 200 yards sounded like a downgrade. Hatcher recognized the doubt. He had sensed it, himself. However, he also realized something Williams would discover. In the mountains, the most potent weapon wasn't always the greatest. The weapon that allowed you to live a long time was the best one. Sufficient for tomorrow's need. Another portion of the story was revealed by the arrows Hatcher made. Every shaft was meticulously chosen from the straight grain stalks of chokecherries or service berries, which were collected in late summer and allowed to dry for several months, until the wood was perfectly uniform. Each arrow's straightness had been examined again, discarding any shaft that has even the slightest abnormality. The source of the fletching was, when possible, use turkey feathers. Nevertheless, it is more common to use geese or eagle feathers that were traded. Hatchers parted ways using the right wing feathers on right-handed arrows and directing each feather down the middle, guaranteeing the organic curvature of the arrow would spin while in flight due to the feather. The arrow was stabilized by this spin in the same manner that rifling stabilized a bullet, significantly increasing accuracy outside of 30 yards. The most important part were the arrowheads. Hatcher had experimented with obsidian, knapped flint, and steel trade points. Prior to choosing a layout that incorporated aspects of all three, he used ancient rasp to create his own points. Files producing wide heads with 2 almost 2-inch cutting edges. Broad. The little aim points utilized for mini-games weren't these. These were intended to cause severe wounds. Passageways that would quickly drop a deer or elk. These broadheads' designs demonstrated an awareness that had developed over Hatcher's many murders. Although a small arrow point may go deep, it frequently didn't cause bleeding to occur quickly. A too-wide point could deflect off ribs and lost penetration. The two-in design by Hatcher struck the balance, small enough to smash through the rib cage and wide enough to cut through both lungs in a broadside shot. Not deflecting. But Hatcher didn't just teach Williams the bow and arrow's technical aspects. During the winter, the more general lesson was to alter your perspective on hunting in general. Using a mountain man with a rifle may wake up, see an elk 150 yards away, and drop one with a single shot, and before breakfast cooled, have beef in camp. This promoted a hunting approach founded on distance and opportunity. When opportunities arose, you fired, relying on the rifle's range to outrange your place. Everything changed with a bow. You now needed to adopt the mindset of the prey you were pursuing. You must have known. Where, depending on the temperature and wind direction, elk would eat at dawn. You had to comprehend the routes they went through, between the regions used for feeding and sleeping. You needed to identify which trees offered protection for your approach, and which would reveal your motion in relation to the skyline. Williams learned how to follow game trails from Hatcher over the course of several weeks. The elk trails that were often utilized revealed wear patterns that revealed the animal's usual path. Good morning. Migrations headed downhill in search of eating grounds and water. In the evening, migratory headed uphill in search of sleeping locations. And a skilled hunter may set up shop along these paths and wait, allowing the animals to approach him rather than going after it. Most trappers lacked the patience needed for the technique. It could take you 2 hours to position for a 3-second shot to be made. You could sit still for the whole morning behind a fallen log, anticipating the elk's arrival in the tiny clearing so you can get a clear shot. This hunting was done as meditation, as a game of chess, as a practice of complete concentration. Williams demonstrated rapid learning, in part because he had no option. Hatcher made it apparent that silent hunting was a required skill. It was a matter of survival, instruction for a man who desired to maintain his hair. Williams was able to shoot Hatcher's bow proficiently by the end of December. At 30 yards, it regularly struck a target the size of an elk's chest. By January, he had used an arrow to kill his first deer, a young buck that had passed by his location without noticing his presence. Any greenhorn might follow the blood trail left by the deer's collapse, which occurred less than 40 yards away. Adhere to. However, Hatcher's system was truly validated in February during what mountain men referred to as the hungry period, when game was in little supply and the weather was at its worst. A breeze from Chinook had swept through the Little Snake River Valley, softening the heavy snow and warming the air for a short time. Then the temperature dropped, once again forming a crust on the snow that prevented deer from moving about. And elk. With each stride, the animals gained ground, wearing themselves out and making wolves and mountain lions easy prey. A tiny herd of captured mule deer was discovered by Hatcher and Williams, in a gully where snow had accumulated up to 6 feet thick. The animal had donned a system of tracks through the snow, making them just the right width for their bodies. They were unable to run. They couldn't get away. All they were doing was surviving till the snow solidified, or melted. One deer would have been killed by a rifle shot, scattering the others, letting them fight through the heavy snow until they were exhausted or taken by predators. It would have been inefficient of the resource, but effective for the shooter. Rather, Hatcher and Williams gradually employed their bows, of 3 days to remove 5 animals from the herd in a targeted manner. They were meticulous in their job, only taking photographs that some would result in fast kills. They let the herd settle by waiting in between kills. The deer never connected with the silent demise of their friends due to the human presence they were unable to sense. The meat from the 5 deer was sufficient for Williams and Hatcher to survive the remainder of the winter, with extra to sell to other trappers who weren't as provided. More significantly, the herd's surviving deer were able to procreate the next spring, guaranteeing for upcoming seasons that game would still be accessible in this drainage. This environmentally friendly method of hunting symbolized ideas that were decades ahead of their time. In the 1820s and 1830s, the majority of trappers saw game as a limitless resource to be used without regard for the future. Hatcher recognized that in his little nook of preserving game populations in the Rockies meant preserving his capacity to live here all year. Year after year, slowly, news of Hatcher's covert hunting strategy circulated around the dispersed mountain men communities' trading posts and camps. By summertime by 1829, a number of other trappers had started experimenting with hunting bows. Some merely imitated Hatcher's design based on what they had heard. Others attempted to modify it or make it better. Hunting methods. One of the most well-known mountain men in American history, Jim Bridger, spent during the 1829 rendezvous. Hatcher taught them how to make bows. Bridger has already knew a number of native languages and had researched the weaponry used by many tribes. He understood. It was evident right away that Hatcher had produced something that combined elements of several traditions with his own. Simplifying the design for mass production was Bridger's contribution. Although he acknowledged that most trappers lacked access to Missouri orange wood, they could locate appropriate. If they knew what to look for, they could find bow wood in the highlands. The Rockies were home to choke cherries, ash, and service berries, and given the right conditions, may create useful boughs. Properly seasoning the timber presented a hurdle. Newly cut wood was weak and excessively pliable. If dried wood was not properly treated, it would break. Bridger created a technique of carefully controlled fire used to slowly dry green staves over low heat, a procedure that resulted in flexible and sturdy wood, but it took several days. By 1830, about 21 alongside their rifles, mountain men frequently used bows for hunting. The four-hunting technique never fully replaced weapons. The rifles were still required for long-range game capture and defense when stealth was neither feasible or required. However, for bows offered an alternative to silence in circumstances where it was important. The tactical benefits increased beyond hunting and silence. A bow-wielding trapper might capture tiny game without drawing attention to himself. Within audible range, he was able to hunt close to his camp without drawing notice. He might work on his firing abilities without using lead and powder, which may not be able to be replaced until the next supply run. The economic benefits were equally important. At the trading posts, a pound of gunpowder cost $1 and a pound of lead cost an additional $50. A trapper utilizing a rifle to the fullest extent possible ingests 6 to 8 pounds of lead and powder annually, which is a substantial cost in comparison to his fur revenues. Materials from the wild might be used to make arrows. You had a nice bow once, and had mastered the art of shooting it. Your time and attention were the only constant expenses. The rendezvous in 1832 with more than 300 trappers, Pierre's Hole hosted the biggest assembly of mountain men to date, traders as well as related staff. The event was held at the Teton Basin, a wide valley encircled by mountains that offered the thousands of horses that lived there superior hunting and grazing conditions. Went with the exchanging parties. Over the course of the week-long gathering, Hatcher conducted unofficial classes on bow building and crafting an arrow. He had laid raw materials on a buffalo hide and established up shop beneath a cottonwood tree close to the creek. As interested trappers gathered around, Hatcher would explain the methods and show them off. Justification for every action. The choice of wood for bow staves was one example. Hatcher had brought many samples. Mountain ash from higher altitudes, Osage orange from the bottoms of the Missouri River, and serviceberry from the lower elevations. He described the traits of every kind of wood and how to recognize well-seasoned wood, material, and what characteristics to consider while choosing a certain piece. Hatcher used a draw while the trappers looked on. Knife to form a stave of seasoned ash. The instrument managed curls and eliminated wood, progressively exposing the rough blank to the shape of the bow. The necessary work judgment over force. If you were overly forceful, you would cut too much wood, which would make the bow weaker. Too hesitant, and the procedure would take an eternity. Hatcher described how to read the wood's grain by observing its natural lines, instead of rather than slicing through them. Cuts in the cross grain caused weak spots where the bow could break under pressure. After the grain allowed stress to be distributed uniformly along the bow's length by maintaining the structure's continuity from tip to tip. Even with skilled workers, the molding process took many hours. At regular intervals, Hatcher would carefully bend the stave to examine how each limb worked, reacted to pressure. The intention was to design limbs that bowed uniformly along their length without any stiff areas that bent too little or weak parts that bent too much. One more workshop concentrated on creating arrows. From shaft selection to final assembly, Hatcher demonstrated how to find appropriate shoots in the wild, when to collect them, and how to bundle and dry them appropriately. He used heated stones to demonstrate the straightening method, demonstrating how to sight down the shaft and determine which bends require adjustment. Interest in the fletching demonstration was especially high because many trappers have attempted to make arrows but had trouble making them fly straight. According to Hatcher, fletching alignment was crucial since it demonstrated how even a small misalignment might make arrows wobble and lose accuracy while in flight. Using practice strokes with his knife, he broke turkey feathers down their spine and then showed the correct angle at which they can be mounted on the shaft. The feathers were arranged to spin the arrow while it was in flight, similar to how rifling a bullet stabilized it. The challenge was to align all 3 feathers at Hatcher, used years of expertise and meticulous measuring to achieve the exact 120-degree separation. The workshops drew both interested students and skeptics. A few elderly trappers disregarded. When better technology was available, bow hunting was a step backward, going back to archaic techniques. Some publicly expressed this cynicism, asking why anyone would pick a bow when a decent hawk and rifle might